societies. And I think it's particularly important because maybe unlike in the case of climate, the scientists themselves don't always agree on what to expect for the future or even how to interpret the science that exists.
Yeah. And
I just want to add something.
Yeah.
So something that's a little bit subtle about this kind of exercise is to be able to recognize the uncertainty and the divergences that exist, and where is it that scientists agree, where is it that the evidence is strong, where is it that we have clues that matter. Like, even if we're not certain about a particular risk, we might have clues about it. But if the risk has huge severity, in other words, if it does unfold, then it could be catastrophic, then policymakers need to make attention. And it's always difficult when we don't have proof that something terrible is going to happen. Maybe like a good analogy is tipping points in climate, right? Because there's not enough past evidence to be sure that a particular tipping point is going to happen. So the situation is similar in AI in the sense that we don't have the experience of, say, machines that are like really smart and can change society and be even potentially smarter than us. So how can we deal with the right policy decisions? But that's why it is so important to have as neutral and as like fact-based evaluation of what is going on available to everyone, and in a language that is accessible to everyone, and of course for policymakers, which, by the way, is difficult for scientists to achieve. They need help, they need iterations, they need feedback from people who are used to the interface between science and policy.
is there anything in particular about the highly technical nature of AI and also the pace of change that makes this interface particularly difficult?
Yes. The facts shown in the scientific benchmarks across labs, companies, and academia on AI show very rapid growth of the capabilities of these systems. And that growth is uneven. So we see AIs even surpassing most people on some measurements of capability and being kind of stupid or like a 6-year-old on some other things. So it's very difficult to grasp what that means. But because it's moving so fast, there's always going to be a lag between, even like the scientific papers take time to be written. If there are studies, so think about studies that involve people, that they're going to take months. And so by the time we start seeing clues that there's a potential problem, so you can think of something recent that was not expected, that like the psychological effects on people of these chatbots. We now have lots of anecdotal evidence, and we're only starting to see the scientific studies. And of course, on the policy side, it's going to be even later, because those discussions are going to happen after we see stronger scientific evidence. So there is going to be a lag, and that's a real problem, because things could move too fast for policy to catch up.
So maybe that leads well into our next question. We often hear that AI governance is moving too slowly. And from your experience, like, what kinds of scientific assessments or benchmarks could realistically keep pace with this rapid change?
Yeah, that's a great question. My opinion on this is that we should be thinking about not just policy in the usual sense of like coming up with principles, but we should try to strive for high-level principles that can be applied without having to go into the details, because the details are going to change. And the second thing is, I think we should strive for technology that are going to help to implement those guardrails in the field, in the deployment of AI, because otherwise there's not enough time to react.
Well, thank you for those insights. And also congratulations on your recent appointment to the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI. In a few words, how do you see this new panel helping to strengthen the link between science and global AI policymaking?
Well, I think there's something really important about this panel, and its global aspect and being rooted in the UN. And the reason I'm saying this is that AI is going to be transforming our world very clearly, and it's going to have global effects, whether it is on the good side, the benefits, or on the risks, but also the kind of power relationships that are going to be changing in the future. And I'm personally very concerned about how this will unfold for developing countries in the global south. And we need to work in a multidisciplinary way so that we can foresee those effects and we can start discussions to make sure that everyone is at the table and no one is on the menu.
Well, well said, Professor Benjo. Well, thank you very much for kickstarting our discussion. We will now turn to our panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is essential that discussions about AI policy include the voices of key industry actors. And I am pleased to invite Mr. Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President, Microsoft Corporation, for his keynote address.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My apologies for being a few minutes late. I want to offer a couple of thoughts this morning. The first thing I think we should come together to think about is that, in my opinion, this is a moment in time when we need to reflect on and reinvest in the importance of the United Nations. There is a well-known economic theory that says that humanity is, in many ways, almost destined to repeat its great economic mistakes every 80 years. The reason it's 80 years is because that is basically the lifespan of human beings. And so every 80 years, almost everyone who had any living memory of a prior financial calamity has left the planet. If you look at the Great Recession that started in 2008, what you realize is that it happened 79 years after the stock market crash that led to the Great Depression in 1929. And you can follow this series of financial mistakes all the way back to the bursting of the tulip bubble in the Netherlands hundreds of years ago. I think there is a corollary worth thinking about. Just as there is a risk that humanity forgets the mistakes it made 80 years ago, humanity runs the risk of forgetting the great successes it created 80 years ago. It was just over 80 years ago that the world came together to create the United Nations. It was, in my opinion, one of humanity's greatest accomplishments of the 20th century. It is a unique organization in a very imperfect world. And so, of course, on any day in any year, it is possible for anyone to blame the United Nations for the imperfections that we see all around us. But the truth is this: those imperfections are fewer, and their consequences are less disastrous, in my view, because of the United Nations. And one of the great things about working at Microsoft in a job like mine is that I get to work in a global organization. We have subsidiaries in 120 countries. We do work in 190 countries. We see the world. It turns out that everywhere we go, we see the United Nations. Sometimes it's the United Nations Development Program working to foster economic development. Sometimes it is UNHCR helping refugees. Sometimes it is the UN Office of Human Rights seeking to protect human rights. But the truth is, if there's a problem, the United Nations is almost always part of the solution. We need to remember this. And we need to remember that however challenging the last 80 years have been, we have managed as humanity, as a species, to live with the ever-constant presence of nuclear weapons without using them or destroying ourselves. The United Nations has, in fact, in my view, been indispensable to not just the protection of people, but the preservation of our species. Why does that matter now? Why should we talk about it today and this week in Delhi? Because here we are on the cusp of the future. A technology that we all know will likely change the future. Here we are in the second month of the second quarter of the 21st century, and we need to focus on how we bring the institutions on which we rely into that future. So then let me talk about a second aspect that I think is so important to think about this morning. One of the things I'm constantly struck by leading a global organization is how often everyone disagrees with each other about almost everything. But one of the things I've learned along the way is that I think one of the reasons people so quickly disagree is that we rush so quickly to debate competing solutions. This happens in domestic politics, it happens in international diplomacy, it frankly happens in a global company. It actually happens everywhere, even in families. As soon as there's a problem, people want to talk about the solution. And then people have different solutions, and then they debate, and they disagree, and they argue, and sometimes it's even worse than that. One of the things I've learned is the reason people so often disagree about the solution is they don't have a common understanding of the problem. They don't spend enough time talking about the problem. They don't have a shared contextual understanding of the problem they're trying to solve. They're too quick to want to blame someone for the problem, and then that spirals into a discussion that becomes completely unconstructive. Why does that matter today? Because what we're here to talk about today is all about creating a more common understanding together based on science of where artificial intelligence is going. This is an indispensable tool. Indeed, it's a critical service for humanity. So we can all learn together, we can all think together, we can all understand together what is going on in the world. I think it's especially critical, to be honest, when it comes to artificial intelligence, because I think if you even consider most of the conversations you have about this technology, I would argue that it has two flaws. The first flaw is it usually involves people making very grandiose predictions about the future. You know what? I've worked in the tech sector for 32 years. I have listened for more than 3 decades to my colleagues in my industry around the world make bold predictions about the future. No one ever holds them accountable a decade later for whether they were right or wrong. I used the researcher agent in Microsoft Copilot a couple weekends ago, and I loaded a lot of names, I won't say whom, but you can guess. And I said, look at all the predictions they made about all the technologies, and look at the predictions they made about when these technologies would come to do something or another, and give them a grade. The average grade was 25%. You couldn't even get close to the top of failing. You were at the bottom. So let's just understand one thing together. There is no such thing as a crystal ball. No one has one. But what we do have is the ability to understand where we are today. have is a better understanding to just appreciate what is happening each and every year. There's a second flaw, in my view, in many of the conversations that take place, including at this AI summit. Everybody wants to talk about how they're going to make machines smarter. That's interesting. I think it's interesting to imagine living in a world where a data center is like a country of geniuses. But as I mentioned yesterday, compared to the people who lived in the Bronze Age, we're all geniuses already. What that should remind us is that human capability is neither fixed nor finite. And so what really matters is, in my opinion, is not whether we are going to build machines that are smarter than humans. Yes, in some ways we will, but how will we use those machines to make people smarter, to help us do what we need to do? That is what this effort is all about. Let's harness the power of science to build a common understanding of what is changing each year, and then let's connect it with the global dialogue on governance so we can pursue policies that will ensure that this technology serves people. There's no better place to get started than here. There's no better time than now. And let's face it, there is no better institution on the planet that can do more to serve humanity and protect the world than the United Nations. And on behalf of Microsoft, I just want you to know we are putting our full energy and resources to do everything that we can to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for those insights on responsibility, accountability, and the role of industry. We now turn to our panel. Our panel brings together scientific leadership, public policy expertise, and international coordination. Please welcome to the stage our speakers, Professor Balaraman Ravindran, IIT Madras, Swaumya Swaminathan, former Chief Scientist, WHO, Ajay Kumar Sood, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, and Anne Bouvereau, France's Special Envoy for AI. I am also pleased to introduce our moderator, Amandeep Singh Gill, Undersecretary General and Special Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies. I invite him to guide the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anil, for leading us, and for those who've not read his book, The Elegant Math Behind Machine Learning, please do have a go at it. We cannot govern something that we don't understand. So something as simple as, like, if 90% of AI is matrix multiplication, a 0.01%, as he was explaining, improvement in efficiency of matrix multiplication has huge energy implications. So I want to welcome our esteemed panelists. The stage has been set by very inspiring keynotes and a fireside chat. So we will dive straight in. And since we are running a little short of time, I'm going to compress the two rounds into one rapid fire round. So all of you have worked on or are working on
the science policy interface. And my sense is that there is a loop here, that there is a loop between science and evidence and policy. And we want to explore that loop today in the context of the significant development of the setting up of the International Independent Scientific Panel at the United Nations. So I want to start with you, Soumya. You were the first chief scientist, first woman chief scientist at the WHO, and worked at a very difficult time during the COVID when evidence, trusted evidence, was so critical. So in your view, what makes this evidence that comes from science trusted and actionable for policymakers?
Thank you. I think that's quite a difficult question because I don't know if we know the answer, but we did learn a lot of lessons during COVID, and it was very clear that on the one hand, trust in science, and we saw countries where the leadership was led by science, led by scientists, and good public health policies were made based on data and evidence, and these were iteratively improved or changed based on the evolving evidence, because I think in a way AI is like COVID. The evidence is very rapid. The field is moving so rapidly. In COVID, we had to review a couple of hundred publications every day to understand what was happening on different aspects on the virus, on the immunology, on how vaccines were working and drugs, and we had to make recommendations based on the best available evidence that day. I think we may be in a similar situation with AI, and it's wonderful that the UN has now set up this body, which I see as something like the IPCC. I think we do need global governance. We need something like, we're talking now about preventing future pandemics by sharing data on pathogens, making sure that we have protocols in place where countries are willing to share that data, and also, of course, to share the tools, the vaccines or drugs when they become available, when or in case there is another pandemic. Similarly, I hope that this scientific body that's been set up by the UN would also establish systems that would link to national bodies and systems, and that would ensure the voices of all are heard. So one of the things during COVID was some of our recommendations were relevant in high-income countries but not in low-income countries, because the context is very different. And the WHO was criticized for this, I think rightfully so, and we need to learn from those mistakes. So it's the voices, for example, of women, a low-income woman, a farmer in a remote place, is going to use technology very differently from a large farmer with access to lots of machines in Europe or North America. So if AI has to work for everyone, then we need to make sure that those voices are heard. And ultimately, I think that loop you talked about, sometimes policy is made in advance of evidence. You can't wait. But the policy must change. It must ask for the relevant evidence and be able to adapt when that is clear.
Thank you very much, Soumya. I'm going to come to you, Ravi, Professor Balaraman Ravindran. Now, as AI policies begin to take shape, and you've been involved in some policy making yourself, what signals from regulators or public sector users should most urgently guide future AI research priorities? So in a sense, the loop coming back into research.
So, thank you for that question. So, AI right now, right, especially in the global south, so we don't completely understand the implications of adopting AI and how is it going to affect, the society, the people, livelihood, and everything, right? In fact, I also feel that we don't have enough evidence about how AI is even affecting the social fabric, because how are children getting increasingly isolated with the adoption of AI, and whether the effect is uniform between cities and in rural India, because the cultural setup is very different, and so on and so forth. So if the government, as we heard our Honorable Prime Minister say yesterday, should focus more on youth, right, and the impact of AI on youth, what is the evidence do we have about what is happening in India, right? So we hear stories about, how there is dependence of on AI models of children, and also people who are, mentally challenged and so on and so forth, who are under stress. But all of these stories are coming to us from the West, right? So what is it that's happening in India? So when we have these kinds of policy decisions that have to be made, the government says that AI should be pushing, efficiency in agriculture, right? So do we have a benchmark in India that can evaluate the efficiency of or effectiveness of these AI models in agriculture? What are the kinds of flaws, right, that happens when I, for example, build a bot that can act as a co-pilot for a farmer, right? So these are bigger challenges. So we have a lot of questions that we have.
If I can quickly follow up, where do you actually see evidence for impact in the Sustainable Development Goals space? I mean, just a quick example or two.
So, that was not in the notes he gave us earlier, so I have to think on my feet here.
Now you have
So, let me take one thing that we are very familiar with, we are working on right now, is on the education space, right? So for example, we don't have evidence of AI interventions. How likely is it to change student learning behavior? So we have done some preliminary studies. So the author of the study is somewhere in the audience, because I know, because he has been sending me pictures of the stage. So what we have found out is the effectiveness of AI adoption is a direct function of habit. So if the students are using AI more, then they tend to, but now I don't know what is the causal factor there. I don't know if the causal factor is whether they are using AI more, therefore they get better effect, or do they use AI more because they are getting better effect, better impact from AI. So these are questions that we have to ask. Even in something as simple as education. I'm saying simple because there's a lot of positive buzz around using AI in education. But even there, we need a lot more evidence to come in place.
Thank you, Ravi, and we're honored to have you on the new International Independent Scientific Panel. So if I may jump to you, Anne, and you're an AI scientist yourself. All of us know you as the special envoy of President Macron, who made the February summit happen last year in Paris, but you're also an AI scientist. So from your perspective, you kind of lived in these two worlds. So what works best for the interface? What kind of scientific evidence would you take to President Macron if you were to convince him to change the policy?
Well, thank you for the question. I studied AI a long time ago, but I'm not really a scientist. But I try to understand, of course. Understanding, I think, is probably the very first thing. And before we move to policymakers, I think it's for citizens, for us as human beings. The things that we don't understand, we tend to be more afraid of. I often quote scientist Marie Curie. She wasn't an AI scientist, but she's one of the brightest scientists that we've had, 2 times Nobel laureate. And there's a wonderful quote by her. She says, she says, nothing in life is to be feared, everything is to be understood. And now is the time to understand more, because of course there are more things we can be afraid of at the time when she was living, and now as well. So trying to understand things, having scientific panels is definitely the right thing to do. And we're fully supportive in France of the scientific panel. We're very proud that Joëlle Barral is our nominee. She's a scientist in AI and health and a member of the panel. This is absolutely excellent. So yes, understanding things is absolutely key. And then maybe just a second point, and to give an example of how understanding something or not can lead to very different policy decisions. In the field of AI and work, we've had predictions. I remember in 2013, that was the previous AI revolution, but scientists, I believe at Oxford, said within 10 years, half of the jobs will disappear. We haven't seen that. At the AI summit in Bletchley Park, for very good reasons, we had frontier AI leaders, in particular Elon Musk, saying within 2 years, half of the jobs will disappear. So, of course, the fact that this didn't happen doesn't mean that there isn't a risk for work. Of course, there's a risk for work. But if your potential or probable outcome is the end of jobs, then you need to think about universal basic income. What are we going to do with all the people who don't have jobs? If what economists are saying is that 80% of the jobs will be transformed, then the policy outcome is training, skilling, reskilling, and helping to educate people. That's why listening to economists and having the International Labour Organization and other institutions really follow closely what is happening in which countries for younger people, for older people, for women, for men, for different types of jobs, that's super important.
Merci beaucoup, Anne. Merci. And I'm going to turn to you, Professor Sood. You know, you occupy an important position within the Indian system, and you look at science broadly. And India has deployed some of these technologies at societal scale. India stack the digital public infrastructure. So how do you look at the AI opportunity, and importantly, how do you look at AI risks? And how are you prioritizing R&D allocations to harness the opportunities, manage the risks?
Thank you for having me on the panel. As you know that all the aspects which you asked, we have had very extensive consultations across all stakeholders, and we came out with the National AI Governance Framework. Not the regulatory framework, but how do we really handle AI, all aspects. And there we have looked at how do we enable the compute facility, compute resources to our people, because we are not at the scale when a few trillions of dollars are being invested. So we came out with some framework which we think with public-private partnership, we could enable it. And we could see the results of that within a year as demonstrated in AI Summit, the release of AI sovereign models and so on. Other aspect, which is very important, as you rightly said, the risk assessment. So this is where, as had been mentioned, our experience with the digital public infrastructure, which has been rolled on a very public scale, with the safety and security, which is as difficult as in AI. AI, of course, is more difficult. We still do not know the risks. But when we were dealing with the digital public infrastructure, either for the financial transactions or for identity verification and so on, it was a challenge. And that was done by embedding governance through technical design. And this, what we call techno-legal, which Honorable Prime Minister said in the Paris Summit and also mentioned here. So this is where we are suggesting that this could be one way to look at. It's not that everything is laid out. We will need a framework for that. We will need technologies for that. But this is one way which will have a smooth interaction if we can bring this techno-legal framework.
Thank you so much for those insights. And now that, since we are running out of time, and I'm going to discriminate against the men on the panel, so my apologies in advance. So I'm going to turn back to you, Soumya and Anne, for like 40-second, 30-second reflection. What do you think in terms of the pace and direction of technology, opportunities, including for accelerating scientific discovery and risk? What would be your advice for the International Independent Scientific Panel? Maybe Anne, you can go first, 40 seconds.
Yes, I think AI has a strong potential for helping science. We've seen that with the two Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry a year back. There's many more areas in science where AI can help. It can only be possible if we have databases of scientific data that are available to the world and that are constructed by scientists and funded by governments and international institutions around the world. So this is a very important topic for research.
Thank you, Anne. Soumya, you have the last word.
Yes, I agree very much with Anne, and I think that the scientific panel could actually help network many more groups of scientists from around the world, perhaps sectorally, for example, what's happening in health, what's happening in education, what's happening in agriculture, looking at the evidences as they emerge, encouraging research, setting priorities, but also looking at safety and risks, because I think that's going to be very important. There may be unanticipated risks and harms that we have not considered, And of course, equity, being a UN-led panel, ensuring that equity is at the heart of AI and it's been done for public good.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a great closing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our outstanding panel. And we are going to move straight to the closing. Over to you, Anil.
Thank you to the panel for a rich and forward-looking discussion. To close this session, it is my honor to invite Josephine Teo, Minister for Digital Development and Information of Singapore, to deliver the closing remarks. Minister Josephine Teo.
Good morning, everyone. First, allow me to thank the Secretary General for his remarks, and it serves as a very useful guidance to all of us working in this important technology. For the closing this morning, I thought that it would perhaps be useful to offer a perspective from a small state. Singapore has a population of just 6 million people, and more than 30 years ago, at the UN, we became the convener of the Forum of Small States, which still has about 108 members. I will just make 3 points on how we look at developments on this front. The first point is that we believe in AI being used as a force for the public good. But to do so, it is important that we continue to invest in the science that underpins it and ground trust in evidence. This certainly requires sustained investment in research, and is also the reason why we set aside $1 billion in a national AI R&D plan, which will include foundational and applied research into responsible AI. We believe in it, and we have to put money behind this effort. There are, of course, other investments, such as in building up a digital trust center. It's our designated AI Safety Institute that has been participating in important conversations on this topic, as well as setting up a Center for Advanced Technologies in Online Safety. So those are just some of the efforts that we can dedicate resources to doing as a small state. The second point I want to make is that there is almost always going to be a tension between moving quickly, given the pace of AI development, and moving carefully, given the latest evidence that presents themselves on what we should be paying attention to. Both impulses are necessary, and we believe it is not impossible to try and balance them through integration of science and policy. It is not easy, but it is not an effort that we must give up on. I should just add that on this score, it will be much better if we can cooperate internationally to develop sound approaches that can also be interoperable across different jurisdictions. And this is one effort that we believe underpins the work that is being carried out by the UN. And this brings me to my third point. I want to highlight the important role that an organization like the United Nations plays in facilitating global discourse to bridge science and policy. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this effort. We must recognize that global AI governance landscape is becoming increasingly fragmented. There are multiple initiatives, frameworks, and institutions. The UN's unique value lies in your legitimacy and inclusiveness to encourage interoperability across efforts. The Secretary talked about this too. We therefore welcome the establishment of the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI, building on the work of the UN High-Level Advisory Body on AI, which published its report on governing AI for humanity at the end of 2024. We note that the panel's multidisciplinary approach covering machine learning, applied AI, social science, ethics, all of these are necessary to address the complexity of AI governance challenges. Finally, I would just like to acknowledge that we now have substantial convergence on the high-level AI principles. Joshua talked about this. Transparency, accountability, fairness, safety, but the challenge is in operationalizing them. We need to find standardized evaluation methodologies that work across different regulatory contexts. We need capacity building so that all countries can meaningfully engage with the technical evidence and not just with the large AI research ecosystems. I would encourage all stakeholders to view scientific input not as a constraint on policy flexibility, but as a foundation for more durable, effective governance that can maintain public trust. We need to keep the conversations going, one where science informs governance and governance sharpens science. I would just perhaps end by highlighting Singapore's continued commitment to contribute to advancing these discussions. We were very fortunate to host the International Scientific Exchange on AI safety and to bring about the Singapore Consensus on Global AI Safety Research Priorities. Joshua was in Singapore for this very momentous event. We will continue to participate in joint testing efforts of the International Network for Advanced AI Measurement, Evaluation and Science. We have organized 2 editions of the Singapore AI Safety Red Teaming Challenge, the first multicultural and multilingual AI safety red teaming exercise focused on the Asia-Pacific region. And as chair of the ASEAN Work Group on AI Governance, we have actively spearheaded efforts to foster a trusted environment in ASEAN by adapting global norms and best practices for ASEAN, and in bringing about regional harmonization through the ASEAN Guide on AI Governance and Ethics, as well as expanding it to address the risk in generative AI. We are now working within ASEAN to explore practical tools for AI safety testing and aim to collectively develop a set of AI safety benchmarks that reflect our region's concerns. And finally, I'd like to welcome all colleagues to join us in Singapore for the 2nd edition of the International Scientific Exchange, which we expect to take place on the 17th and 18th of May. And we look forward to furthering our discussions in this area. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Mr. Teo, for your closing remarks. This session is now concluded. Thank you very much.